everybody. My name is Steve Dolinsky. I am the founder of Pizza City Fest Los Angeles. We had Pizza City Fest Chicago last year, and we're super excited to have our next festival coming up in about 5 weeks in Los Angeles, at LA Live, right downtown on the event deck, right across the street from Crypto.com Arena. The reason we're having this seminar is actually to get people excited to talk about Pizza Fest, but we're also going to be talking about a little bit of the history of artisan pizza in California. One of the reasons we wanted to do an event in Los Angeles was really to celebrate the pizza community, to talk about the history, to talk about the people making the greatest dough, the greatest pizza, what makes great dough, in fact. And we've got some experts joining us tonight to talk about the history and really what makes LA and I guess California pizza so special. First of all, a couple of housekeeping things. You may have heard of Modernist Pizza, the 3-volume tome to pizza. It is an incredible collection. It's a $450 retail value. Everybody who is registered is going to be entered, but you also need to follow Pizza City Fest LA. And we're going to be having a drawing tomorrow to give away an entire set of the Modernist Pizza collection. So please be sure to follow Pizza City Fest LA. And of course, being registered for this, you're automatically entered. Also have a chance to win a couple of super cool Modernist Pizza calendars. I believe we're going to be giving away 3 or 4 of those as well. So lots of great door prizes to win if you're really into pizza. We also are going to be, talking about the event, which is coming up. And I really want to bring in one of my co-hosts for this because he's been so instrumental. I reached out to Noel Brohner about 13 months ago, and through our mutual friend Chin, who's producing our event. And we had this crazy idea: why hasn't there been a pizza festival in LA? Where would we do it? How would we do it? And I think the most important thing that we're doing is we're curating this. This is not just who sells the most pizza or who's the most popular pizza maker. It was really a personal experience. Noel, myself, Carol really traveled out into the nooks and crannies of Los Angeles and Southern California, and we've curated a list from Bettina up in Santa Barbara, down to Tribute in San Diego, to Truly in Dana Point, to Zelo in Arcadia, all over Southern California. We've got some great pizza makers. So without further ado, I want to bring Noel Brohner into the conversation. You know him all as Slow Rise Pizza on Instagram. And he does a ton of seminars and classes and consults on pizza. But he also just loves to sort of share the passion of local pizza makers, especially the small independent folks. So Noel, are you there?
Steve Dolinsky, how are you?
I'm great, sir. It's great to see you as always. Noel, by the way, is a previous guest on the Pizza City podcast. So if you haven't checked out our podcast, please do so. More information, by the way, about Pizza City Fest, it's all on our website, pizzacityfest.com. That's where you'll have information about what the tickets include. There's VIP, there's general admission. But Noel, you've come up with this really interesting idea called the Collab Lab. What is that?
That is an excellent question. And I don't know if I have a complete answer for you yet, because I think we're going to find out what exactly it is when it happens. And I'm being a little coy. Sorry about that, Steve. You know that I know what it is, but I don't really want to answer the question of what the collab is or what LA pizza is. I'm really into this idea of let's invite the best, or not the best, our favorite, or let's say the most available pizza makers that we can find in California, and let the pizza speak for itself. But to answer your question, my intention is, I don't know why I'm gesticulating at so much. I must be really excited and nervous because I haven't been on Zoom lately. So let me calm down a little bit and see if I can answer your question so we can get to the meat of the matter, which is Stephanie Swane and her beautiful presentation, right?
Yes. But we'll finish your thought, and then I want to add one more thing about seminars.
I will. So obviously we're going to be having 40 pizza makers from around the state, and I've invited about 8 different, mostly chefs that make pizza, because I feel as if the chefs that have made pizza in California are highly responsible for what it is that is the current pizza scene, right? And so whether it's Wolfgang Puck or Nancy Silverton or any of the players that we all all know and love, or even the players that we don't. A lot of what's going on is chef driven, is farmers market driven, is this beautiful confluence of cultures coming together. And so I'm forcing it into like 4 time slots, each on 2 days. And I want to see what it becomes, what it does, how it tastes, what it smells like. And the question will really be answered on site at LA Live.
And then in addition to those tastings that we're going to be having with all the different pizzerias, we've got speakers and seminars throughout the weekend. The Dough Whisperers, Evan Funke, who you know well, and Daniele Uditi from Pisana. Things like a conversation with the producer of Chef's Table Pizza with Chris Bianco and Ann Kim from Pizzeria Lola, both of course featured in the Chef's Table series. How to build a pizza brand, how to make a pizza at home, how to make a pan pizza. So lots of practical advice for people who are interested in learning more about maybe baking pizzas at home or just about pizza culture. But it really is, this goes back to the reason we're getting together today, and we're going to bring Stephanie in here in 1 second. What is it about this market? When we talk about LA, Southern California, we are bringing one stray guy from San Francisco. Neil's coming down from Long Bridge Pizza. Everybody else is Southern California. But there is something about the culture in the state. Obviously, the weather makes it, with the exception of the last 2 months, the weather in California is unbelievable. The produce is incredible. Nancy Silverton, one of the pioneers in Los Angeles at Mozza. But I really feel like also the bread baking is at a different level because you've got places like Tartine in San Francisco, people who really focus on the bread. There's a little guy at Bub and Grandma's who makes the best focaccia I've ever had, I think. They really focus on hydration and fermentation and using great flour that's been milled by small batch folks. So that's really what I get excited about when I talk about pizza in Southern California. Anyway, without further ado, we should bring in our special guest.
Let's
do
you
it.
Want
to introduce her? Or should I?
I would like you to. I love listening to your voice. You have such a beautiful voice for radio, for TV, and all things media, Steve.
You're too kind. All right, I'll send you that check tomorrow morning. Okay, without further ado, Stephanie Swane is the publisher and editorial director of Modernist Cuisine. They, of course, have done Modernist bread, Modernist pizza. They also have art galleries, which I happened to see when I think I was in La Jolla, and I saw they have a gallery there. Stephanie Swane, welcome to our little program.
Hello, Steve. Hello, Noel. Wonderful to see you both. And thank you again for inviting me to speak today about something that I love, which is California and the wonderful pizzerias and pizza makers that have come through California in a variety of decades.
Beautiful. And Stephanie, when we talk about California pizza, I mean, let's go back to the beginning a little bit. And I'm not going to step on your guys' toes here because I know you guys have done all this research. Especially for the book, but what's the genesis of pizza in California and how have we gotten to the point where now people like Fred Eric at Paella are using kombu, and making dashi and putting it in their water to make their dough downtown LA, which would have never happened if it wasn't for people that set the stage before them.
Well, great question, Steve, and a lot of interesting tidbits that we'll talk about during this conversation. But, California, there's a couple of things that have stood out for California. One is it's one of the largest agricultural centers of the United States. So produce has always been something that you could get at any time of the year, depending on where you live, whether you're in Northern California or Southern California, locality was quite available. And so that really kind of helped start what, we know now as the slow food movement, but the beginning of what I would consider artisan pizza and the local toppings and the inspiration from chef techniques like Alice Waters, which we'll talk about, and Spago with Wolfgang Puck and Nancy Silverton. They were all people that were really interested in traveling abroad and bringing that back to California.
Good answer. I like it. Well, Steve can definitely ask a multi-part question. I don't know if I remember the entire one, but you know what? It starts us off on the right foot. Thank you for that, Steve. We have a lot to get through, folks. So without further ado, I think we should, Stephanie, I think we should start at the top, right? And I know you have a beautiful presentation, but let me give you a few softball questions just to get you going, and then we can talk. I'll chime in whenever necessary, but I don't feel like we have to force a Q&A on these people. We know what we want you to say. You know what you want to say, and who knows? There's going to be some awesome questions. So I think some beautiful things will come up during our next hour and a half together. What do you say?
Sounds great. I'm in.
Good.
Go.
So let's start with our little introduction, and maybe you could talk about what makes a pizza style and how Modernist defines a style. Can we start with that?
Sure. I mean, it's a great way to start since we're going to talk about a specific style that is, unique in different ways. So for a pizza style for modernist cuisine and how we look at the separations or delineations of different styles is we look at thickness of crust. We look at texture of the crust and crumb. We look at the amount of toppings as well as sauce. We look at the order that they're placed on the pie or the dough. We look at specific ingredients, like, for example, Detroit style pizza uses brick cheese. So to be part of that style, it's a necessary item within those parameters. There also might be some techniques that in the making or the shaping of the dough that's necessary for a specific trait. And the biggest thing that I feel about styles is that they've traveled outside of their origin. So they have, like Detroit style pizza, one of my favorite Detroit style pizzas places is in Los Angeles at Bologna Pizzeria. Amazing Detroit style pizza. How it came from Detroit to LA is a way to show that this style has translated. And while Justin's Detroit style pizza is my favorite, even after traveling to a variety of places in Detroit, some people might not agree, but I think so. But he's following the same processes and processes, and also the way that you would find a Detroit style pizza. He might have changed the ingredients to make them better, but the idea is there.
Got it.
And then also how and where it's sold is also another parameter, because sometimes you'll find things that are sold in a bakery versus a pizzeria or a slice house, for example. The way that they're sold, whether they're sold whole or cut, etc.
Awesome. So would you say that when you were evaluating different pizzerias, did you have like a matrix that included columns and rows, and you were checking boxes and grading and making, how did it work?
There was not just one matrix, Noel. So there were many spreadsheets. I'm sure Steve is the same way in the way that he looks at places. It starts off with a grid of places itself and their locality, and then it might be separated out by styles. And then we're looking at ovens. Ovens say a lot about what type of style you have. Regions like St. Louis, for example, the thin crust conversation I think is really interesting because there's a lot of thin crusts all over the world. And so we would look at those within their own section. But we also, what stands out for us is we take a lot of photos. So every pizzeria that we went to, we took the same type of photos and then we compared them. And I know the last time we talked, I showed a picture of all the crusts in like a compilation of one style. And that was another way that we could visually look at things that were very similar and very different, from top down to side view. So showing the crust and crumb to the amount of toppings, to the layers, all of those things.
Awesome. So you've given us some examples of pizza styles. You kind of explained to us, and I'm sure we'll get into more detail how you've defined it. Can you tell us if you would say there are any common misconceptions about what makes a pizza style?
Well, a lot of a lot of media that we read or digest shows, maybe regionalities or one place, and they'll name that as a style. So it's Joe's Pizzeria, not to be confused with Joe's Pizzeria and all over the place, but Joe's Pizzeria makes a specific kind of pizza, and so they are now called Joe's Pizza Style. But it hasn't traveled anywhere else. It's still only at Joe's. It might only be in, let's say he's in Providence, Rhode Island. So it's never left Providence, Rhode Island. And the other key thing too is that not only has it has to travel, but it has to remain similar to what it was originally. So like Neapolitan pizza, for example, came from Naples, came to the States, went back to Naples, but there's still similarities from the early origination to the current pizza that you can say, okay, that is a specific style.
Got it. That's very interesting. Do you ever travel somewhere? Like I was just in New York and I was walking around Times Square and I saw California beach style cuisine. That was like some sign, right? And I almost took a picture and I'm like, no, that's I
Oh
don't
no,
know.
I take pictures of things like that
Right?
all the time.
Right? So
But I'm
like
like, what does that mean?
well, you have I mean, you have commerce, right? You have marketing, and then you have what you guys do, right?
It's a
What
lot
do
of
you
That's a lot of marketing,
It's a lot of
definitely.
marketing, right? And
Yeah.
how do you balance it out, right?
Well, people, I mean, when it comes to marketing for anything, you want to differentiate yourself and you want to be the best at whatever you do. That's what marketing tries to say to the consumer is like, so sometimes there will be cases where they're justifying their greatness by saying, oh, we make something super unique or original. And that's what they want to focus on, which, it's a marketing tactic, one of many. But it's like the movie Elf, when he goes into the best cup of coffee place and he's like, you did it, you made the best cup of coffee with that sign. It's one of those things where it's like, how many places have you gone past in your neighborhood or anywhere else that says best cup of coffee rated by, Mr. Whatever or Miss Who, it's just another way to toot your horn.
Awesome. Got it. Well, let me do this. Let me just say one thing to the attendees that are watching and listening, and then we'll kick this thing off. So folks, thank you all for attending. I know there are a lot of you out there. One thing that's going to be different about this webinar than some of the others that we do is we're not going to promote you all the panelists. What we're going to do is leave you as attendees and ask you to please use the Q&A. Justin, who many of you already know, is going to be writing the Q&A, and he will be filtering questions up to myself and to Stephanie. And so generally speaking, we will address all that we can for the first, let's say, 45 minutes or hour of the presentation, and then we'll mostly get to your questions at the end, unless something is so pressing that we have to stop it, and we're like, oh my God, we forgot this, and I'll let Stephanie know about our omission, and we'll take care of that. But most of the questions we will save to the end. So thank you in advance for all of your awesome questions, and thanks to Justin for running the chat. He will be missed, but not forgotten. So Stephanie, without further ado, I know that we have a lot to cover. So can you begin by telling us how chefs have influenced the pizza scene in California, according to you and Modernist?
So a lot of things happened early on. And, one of the things that we definitely look back to from the influence of chefs in the pizza scene, especially in California, is the start of Alice Waters and Jeremiah Tower and Chez Panisse in Berkeley. They started a restaurant first, Chez Panisse, which was a very French-inspired menu in 71. And they started having these backyard pizza parties, which also not only was a unique thing to Chez Panisse, that they were kind of an open door policy. You didn't have to be a chef or even have any restaurant industry background in order to start working at Chez Panisse on the early side. And so they had a variety of people that were just really interested in food. And it translated not only to the restaurant, but also to these parties that they would have. You're also talking about the 70s in Berkeley. And so you had a lot of, counterculture food movements at that time. So, hippies. You would have the Grateful Dead, Jerry Garcia playing in the backyard in some place in Berkeley. You had this idea of self-reliance and where did food come from, and kind of this change in looking at food itself, looking for raw foods like vegetarian and veganism and unprocessed food. So these were things that were kind of the conversation at that time in California, and especially in Berkeley, a very big college town. And so it was kind of natural to have something happen here like Chez Panisse, and not to say that it was the only one that happened at that time. There's also a lot of, feminist cafes that were happening at that time, that were inviting and having kind of the same conversation. But the interesting thing was not only did these pizza parties start to happen there and have a communal shift, there was also the baking side. So Stephen Sullivan, who ended up opening Acme Bread with his wife, that started about the same time. Steve and Susie opened Acme Breads in '83. So these pizza parties kind of started in '74, and then the Alice had this passion for a wood burning oven. And so she loved the wood burning oven at Tommaso's in San Francisco. And so eventually she had someone come and install one in the 80s, 1980 actually. And that's how Chez Panisse Cafe was born. And that was the upstairs of the same building that the restaurant was in. And so it was kind of this, from 71 to 80 of people really falling in love with her cuisine, but also thinking about, bringing people together and how could they offer food to more people than just the restaurant clientele. And then there were also, there were cookbooks coming out at that time, Laurel's Kitchen, Moosewood's, all of these things that kind of went back to that Chez Panisse ideology. But I also think Stephen had a lot to do with it too, because he was making breads before he went to start Acme with his wife, baking breads in the cooling of the oven. So while they were making the hot fire of pizzas during the day, Steve was sneaking in bread and testing breads at that night. So there was this also love, like you mentioned before, about fermentation and dough in particular. And I think that that's really one of the key things that happened during that time was, rye breads, whole wheat breads. People were trying to go back to making bread at home, and then serving it and serving it in a way that was successful in a restaurant rather than an afterthought. It was something that they were really proud of.
Interesting. I wish I could have been there. In 71, I was 4 years old, and in 1980, I was studying for my bar mitzvah, so I totally missed it. What about you? You're a California native, right?
I'm not a native. I wasn't born there. I was actually born in Phoenix, so I can't technically say I was a native, but I was growing up during that time in the 70s near in Livermore, which is very near Berkeley. And so I do have some kind of insight. My family wasn't really big into restaurants. We ate a lot at home. My mom loved to cook. And so, but we were really interested in the growing side and food, and we always had a garden, and farming and all of that was part of our life. So yeah, so it was rather unique, and also kind of I mean, you mentioned this, like the radical side of people really thinking about what was being grown around them and using them for their meals, rather than the reverse, where, and I did mention, it started off as a French restaurant because Alice was very spent time in France, had a background in French lit or French cultural studies. So she was very loved French food, but when she started importing things for Chez Panisse, you know, just like we've found over the last couple of years, importing became very, very expensive. And so she started thinking, well, I want to make all these beautiful dishes, but it's no longer cost effective. And so they started looking at what they could get local.
And so then would the interesting pizza activity be happening in Northern California at this point, and nothing really outside of the old Italian-American pizza joints in Southern California at that point until Wolfgang Puck? I'm just curious, how did that happen from Northern to Southern?
So it's there were not a lot. I mean, also as a documentation, it's only what we can find. I'm sure there were at that point in time. There were probably other places that they just weren't getting the press that Chez Panisse was receiving. But with Wolfgang, he actually worked with Alice Waters on and hired the same oven builder for Spago that built the oven at Chez Panisse. And so he had, that was kind of their major connection. They were also very interested in French food. And so they had that connection too, but they both were in love with California ingredients, which is, he married an American. He, I think, originally moved to Indianapolis and then moved to California with his wife. And that was one of the things that they both had in common, is they were looking for kind of simple, fresh foods with great California ingredients. The one thing that I would mention, though, is that Wolfgang basically didn't look at organics until about 30 years after Alice Waters had already started using organics. So that wasn't a commonality between the two. But in 81, that's when he hired the oven builder and then decided to have pizza on his menu at Spago.
Interesting. Now, before we get into Spago, I do have one question. I know that Wolfgang Puck is famous for certain toppings, right? Which does not a style make. But was Alice Waters, did she become famous for any specific pizzas or toppings?
So Alice, if you look at her first cookbook on pizza, and something that was very an ingredient that was always on the menu and that she celebrated were alliums. So garlic and onions. She was very adamant about popularizing them and using them in a variety of ways. And they might not sound so amazing at this point in time, but then it was, very long caramelizations of garlic, confits, roastings, like things that you wouldn't necessarily have on your typical menu at that time.
Got it. I heard talk about goat cheese.
Yeah, goat cheese, gorgonzola as well. One of her popular ones was caramelized onions, gorgonzola, and rosemary. Also, foraged mushrooms. So she was working with local foragers to get wild mushrooms to put on pizzas. Pesto and potato were some early ones. Duck confit was another one that was very popular. And then she also used seafood. So shrimp, green onions and tomatoes, fennel and mussels, squid and three peppers. So all of these things that, you might not think differently about now, but at that point in time, that was pretty groundbreaking.
Absolutely. Sounds delicious.
And
even
delicious.
Now. Right. So at what point would you say that did Wolfgang Puck come there? Was that the impetus for his idea to do pizza? What do you know about that?
So Puck ended up opening a restaurant in San Francisco after Spago, but with Spago, which opened in LA, he hired. Here's some interesting things that we'll talk about too. But he was interested in the oven, but Alice was originally interested in the oven from Tommaso's, which is in San Francisco. So he spent time in the California coast too. But he opened in 82, That's when Spago opened. And his kind of lineage too was that he hired Nancy Silverton as his pastry chef in 82. So you have Nancy Silverton coming into the mix with Wolfgang Puck. You also have Ed Ledoux, who there was some commonality between Ed Ledoux in the Alice Waters and the Spago Wolfgang Puck timeframe. And so Ed Ledoux was a baker. He really loved wood fire. I'm sure there's probably a sprinkling of Alan Scott, the oven builder for bread, a lot of bread ovens at this time too. So people were fascinated with these beautiful ovens at this time. So then you have Ed Ledoux kind of coming into the mix and working with Spago to first, he's actually from San Francisco. That's where I feel like there was more of a mix there. He had a place in San Francisco called Prego. And I know. And then he moved to LA to open up Spago for Puck as his pizza maker. And so that's 82. And then if you know anything about Ed Ledoux, his claim to fame, which isn't, it's kind of sad because I was just looking at the California Pizza Kitchen cookbook, which I have. And so he basically was the brainchild for all of those recipes, including the barbecue chicken pizza on California Pizza Kitchen's menu. And so he left Spago in 85 to help two people that had absolutely no background in food to create that menu, and then stayed there for a while.
Interesting.
And then sadly with Ed, he passed away in 2007. So his legacy was relatively short term.
I was lucky enough to go to his restaurant in North Hollywood.
Yeah, U City, right?
Yeah. But at the time they were doing pizza, but I think it was kind of a shell of itself. And what they were most famous for, I think what they still are, is the salad. You know it all. All right. I think I have another one for you. How about this? So I did a project with Kenter Canyon, which is a lettuce grower started in the Valley. And Barbara, who started it with her husband had been a server at Chez Panisse, and she grew lettuce for Alice. And apparently, Wolfgang Puck was so impressed with the lettuce that she was growing in small batches that he convinced her to move down to LA and grow for him exclusively. And that was the beginning of Kenter Canyon Farms. And she was like one of the very first vendors at the farmers market in Santa Monica in probably 82, 83.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point too that you make, Noel, is that there were cross pollinizations of these growers because they couldn't, when they started, they couldn't afford to just be a grower for one place. So there was this chef network saying, hey, I've got this really amazing forage mushroom person. Can you take some so that we can get more, whatever the case may be, like bringing the mushrooms from Northern California down to the Bay Area. So there was this internal network, or like, oh, I've gone to so-and-so's restaurant. Who are you using for whatever? And is it local?
Got it. Now, I know we have a lot to talk about, but let me just interject one thing. I have a bias here, and I think it's because I'm from California. And when I was reading Modernist Pizza, I almost teared up because I felt like you guys yanked California pizzas from the jaws of history and turned it into something else, this artisan thing, right? And I want to know, not why did you do it, because I understand it, but at any point, was there a California pizza style, as enmeshed as it might have been with slow food or California cuisine? And if so, when?
That's a big question, Noel.
I know you don't have to answer it now. You can defer till later, but I'm just telling you, I have a bias and it's like bubbling under. And so, it's something that I'm going to revisit again. I'll put it at the top of the Q&A at the end.
So California cuisine, I completely agree that exists and existed. California pizza, the interesting part is it hasn't really traveled as California pizza outside of California. So that's the difference. You will have people doing what we call artisan pizza all over the US and elsewhere. We found amazing places too, not in the US, that we felt like were also in this vein. But you're taking the idea, so people aren't importing California ingredients. They're taking what's near them, whether it's a cheese purveyor, a meat purveyor, a vegetable farmer, whatever, and putting that towards their pizza. You're also seeing more experimentation with their dough. So this is where you would find your sourdough starters, people that are coming from the business as a bread baker and turning to pizza. And so these are valid principles, but not necessarily just part of California.
I know. I can't argue with you, and I don't want to. I just wanted to declare my bias, and then we could keep
It's
going.
okay. Now we can move on.
Let's move on. What should we talk about next?
You
let's see.
have the list. What do you want?
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about Ed Ledoux, because I feel like he is really a forgotten character. So when did Wolfgang bring him on? And let's talk about some of the different pizzas that he brought forth, both for Spago and later on CPK, as we call it.
So I think that Ed was very creative, and that he was really interested in flavor profiles and taking, as we said, I think one of his quotes was, being an artist, worked with 10 colors all of his life and then got to do 300.
Yeah.
So he was looking at pizza as a medium and then thinking about all of the things that he could create with. And I think that's a very interesting thing that led to a variety of places at that time, in the 80s, was what makes the most sense when you're putting them on a pizza. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you would normally top. So he also did a lot of Asian inspired ingredients on his pizzas. So he was mixing ethnic palettes, different textures, different colors, so many varieties that I think that Ed really kind of was at the forefront on.
What was it controversial at the time, or was it just confined to like these fine dining types and crazy Hollywood people and that kind of stuff?
Well, CPK, I would say, is pretty like classic American restaurant, right next to, TGI Fridays and those types of places at that time. I know, so I'm speaking as a Californian. So, CPK was, sorry for my Californianness, California Pizza Kitchen, for those that aren't rattling off CPK in their life. It was a go-to place. I'm sure, Noel, you had plenty of meals at your local
I did not.
California Pizza Kitchen.
I'm a reverse barometer. I went there once and yelling and screaming. A client dragged me there. I made it through the 1980s without ever going.
Really? Okay. Well,
not because I'm a snob. I just looked at the pizza and thought I like New York pizza. I was raised in a different time.
Yeah.
It was New York and Chicago. CPK always looked like frozen pizza to me.
Yeah, it does.
We didn't know any better in the Midwest.
It's done really well as frozen pizza too. But yeah. So Ed, I do feel like he does not have the knowledge or the name that he probably should have during that time. And I feel like also the investors that hired him for CPK really took it to the next level, having them become the voices and the celebrities for California Pizza Kitchen. And even in the book, they don't mention him, which I thought was really crazy. Not even a dedication or anything. And all the photos don't show him either. So you never really see Ed making pizza. And it's hard to find pictures of him actually making pizza. You'll see him more in the Spago time. And then after that, he kind of fades out. Yeah. And then his own place that he opened.
So we know a lot about the toppings from CPK, and we know a lot about the toppings from Spago. Do we know anything about the dough, about the pizza crust?
So the dough for Spago, one thing that I found really fascinating is that salmon pizza that we talk about, which is the salmon, creme fraiche, and caviar on top that he's known for. But it's in lore, and I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if you've heard this, but basically Wolfgang Puck, they had a a star that would come into the restaurant all the time, Joan Collins, and she always wanted a salmon bagel. And so they were out of, and they used a brioche a bagel for their salmon plates. And so the story goes that Wolfgang Puck was out of brioche. And so instead of making her typical plate, he made this smoked salmon pizza for her, and she loved it. And then it ended up going onto the menu.
Have you been to Spago? I mean, I guess you have the modern
Well,
incarnation.
Spago, the pizzas are no longer on the menu, so you have to order them as a special item. So we did go and order them. They're off menu, but you can get them anytime you want. And I'm assuming the dough is probably similar to how it was before. I don't know, because I wasn't there in the 80s having pizza. But it's just, I would say, a regular cross between a New York style, very close to a New York style pizza dough. I don't think it's a higher hydration. I don't think it's a special flour. I think it's just probably very similar to what it was before. So the dough there, I don't think was very interesting. One thing that I think is interesting with Chez Panisse was that they were incorporating rye into their dough. And so that was pretty unique for that time. And I think that also had a little bit to do with Stephen and his bread making knowledge too.
Sure.
But I wasn't blown away by the Spago crust, but it's a place and time. So it was an interesting pizza.
Sure. I wonder, I mean, I've studied and worked in French bakeries, and there are a lot of sourdough breads that incorporate a pretty decent amount of rye. So I wonder if, because so many of them were steeped in French and European tradition, if it didn't just come from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's about 20%, which is a typical thing.
Typical thing, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, for the country loaves in France,
exactly.
That's where you would have. So yeah, so it's interesting that it doesn't really get much press either that they had rye in their original dough, but I think it's fascinating.
Yep. And Nancy has rye in her dough, I've been told.
Yeah. So I thought it was fascinating that Nancy was hired as Spago's original pastry chef when they opened the doors in '82, and that she also has, an interesting journey, but she was trained as a chef, unlike Alice Waters, who was not. And so she had kind of a background from Le Cordon Bleu, and then also École Notre. So, but the interesting thing with Nancy is that Nancy, rather than being passionate about French cuisine, she was really, and still is, very passionate about Italian cuisine. And so that kind of differentiated her in her bread making too, because she was obviously a La Brea bakery before the Osteria. And so, she opened La Brea Bakery in '89, and it was because of her passion for dough. And so she was a tinkerer. I think most bread bakers are, where they love to look at, hydration and different types of flours. And, she was a sourdough person too. So she was using starters and pre-ferments and a variety of things. And that kind of led her onto her own journey to make pizza. But unlike what I would say consider Nancy, or unlike Wolfgang and Alice, she was really on the path of the Italian, and really focusing a lot on Roman cuisine.
Yeah. It's late in the game now, and maybe it might be hard for people to understand, but I think when Nancy Silverton opened not La Brea Bakery, but Mozza, I think her to me it was an expression of Italian cooking, right? To use local seasonal stuff. But a lot of what she was using was not actually Italian. And I myself trained at Keste with Roberto. And I remember my first day kind of sheepishly asking, so have you ever been to Mozza? What do you think? And he said the same thing that so many Italians say. I liked it, but quote, it's not pizza.
Yeah,
Right?
well, and I think the interesting thing with Nancy's story is Nancy fell in love with pizza at a wedding
Really?
in
Tell us,
Arizona.
tell us.
So there was some guy was catering a wedding with a lot of other celebs present in Arizona, and he just had a catering business and he didn't have a pizzeria at that point in time. And she and a few other guests thought it was the best pizza they'd ever had. And so Nancy was really passionate about it and spent more time thinking about it and trying that pizza. And, a couple of years later after that happened, Pizzeria Bianco is born. And so that pizza was Chris's baby when
Wow.
he was catering. So it's so interesting to see these connections, and how would you know that um, except for it happened? And so there was the wedding that kind of led Nancy from going from the La Brea Bakery to thinking about a pizzeria herself. But also she spent time at another pizzeria that was a Neapolitan place in LA area, closer to Marina Del Rey, or not Marina Del Rey, Manhattan Beach area. So there was a pizzeria there that she also spent a lot of time with, and that was owned by Pepe Mille, who is the starter of the AVPN. And so again, it went to the Nancy's real love of Italy, which I think also, Chris spent some time in Italy. Chris is from New York. And so he kind of brought that to his ideology to when he started making pizza in Phoenix.
Love it.
But was Mozza considered a groundbreaking pizzeria, and when did that happen?
So Mozza opened in 2006. Actually, Osteria opened in 2006, and then Mozza opened in 2007. And so, no, it wasn't really groundbreaking. I think the interesting thing with Mozza was that you would have, when they first opened, you could only have pizza at the bar. And so that was kind of a new way to introduce pizza. And it was always, it was a very popular place. So there was lines out the door all the time for the restaurant right away. But there were also lots of people that just wanted to go there from the industry to sit at the bar and have pizza. And I think a lot of chefs, a lot of people that were in the restaurant world at that time, they were going for the pizza to sit at the bar and enjoy. And so that kind of morphed into Pizzeria Mozza.
Was it not part of the original business plan for the corner
Osteria?
there? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that it was only served at the bar, so it was something that was definitely she was intrigued with. But I think it also goes back to Nancy's love of bread, and so it was a way that she could still have the use of the wood oven and make something that's bread related in her restaurant.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
she tasted Chris Bianco's pizza, right? What's the timeline there? Like when did Chris get on people's radar, and when did Nancy? Are they parallel?
So Chris moves to Phoenix, and in '88 he starts a catering business. So La Brea Bakery opened in '89. So Chris starts a catering business in a grocery store. Basically, rents out a corner. He moves from New York to Phoenix and starts making mozzarella cheese. And it's kind of this. Chris can tell you more, but it's like a underground mozzarella cheese company. And he decides he can't support himself just making mozzarella. So he rents out the space at this grocery store or grocery store area. and he starts catering. His catering does well, and so this is 88 that he opens up Bianco in 94. So, so in 1994, Pizzeria Bianco was open, where Pizzeria Mozza isn't open until 2006. So there's quite a bit of time between when Chris was up and running to when Nancy finally opens.
Got it. Now, doesn't Nancy also cite the Roman style that you might find at a few different bakeries in Rome for her pizza style?
So in 2018, Nancy opened Triple Beam in which has two locations now in LA, Highland Park and Echo Park, I think, is the other one. Nancy actually brought the baker from Antico Forno Roscioli to LA to help work on the recipe for Triple Beam. So, and you know, Nancy also was one of the reasons why
Pepe Miel?
Franco Pepe from Pepe and
sure.
Grane. She brought Franco to LA to do a couple of pop-ups. So she was really at the forefront of bringing key people over to learn from them, and then apply it to her own pizza.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And now we have Chris Bianco here in Los Angeles, right? So I don't want to say we've come full circle. Again.
Yes, I know. I'm very excited to check out his place. I was really excited when he was at Manufactory prior with Tartine. And so I'm so glad to hear that LA gets to experience his pizza, because it is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Can you tell us what is it that makes Chris Bianco's pizza so special? Why do chefs and food luminaries from all over the world agree that this is the man, this is the one, this is the pizza? What is it? What is it?
Well, it's Chris. Chris is a very creative and very real person. I think those are the easiest words to come out of my mouth about Chris. I love him, but he's also one that, you know, early on he was working with how do I find the food that I need here in Arizona and Phoenix, and what do I do to get there? So he started his own. He worked with farmers to start his own tomatoes. So, you know, working with Bianca Napoli and creating a tomato for his with the consistency that he wanted. These are things that he thought about early on, and I think that makes Chris a really genuine person when it comes to his pizzas. Is he's thinking about what's in his dough. Both him and Marco are amazing bakers, and you know, they've always thought about the base, and then they're also thinking about the sauce, which is also very important, and then they're thinking about the other ingredients too, but from a local standpoint as well as a micro local, so very, very close by. And I think that also makes Chris a little unique. But he's, you know, beautiful wood fire pizzas, and his Pizzeria Rosa is one of my favorites of all time. You know, having that saltiness and then the sweetness of the tomato that he likes, and then with the pistachios, you know, it's a unique pie, but I think it has a lot to do with the way that Chris looks at all of the pieces that he in his puzzle to put together for his pizzas. And it's limited. I mean, they only have a couple of pieces on the menu, and those pizzas they do exceptionally well. And I think that also goes back to why Pizzeria Bianco is so successful.
Not unlike somebody like Anthony Mangieri, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a very limited menu as well, and also rotates based on the season, which I know that Bianco does too. And then, well, and with Chris, he also has the bakery, and so they've always been very attached to other fermentation breads too, not just pizza.
Awesome.
But
It's
Chris
interesting.
started with mozzarella, so like he worked on mozzarella for so long that he understood the cheese so well before he even started working in pizza.
Interesting point. Steve, what were you going to say?
It's interesting how all the pizzerias you guys have talked about so far, with the exception of Justin at Apollonia, wood-fired oven. And whenever I'm eating pizzas in LA, I'm noticing a lot more wood-fired pies, not necessarily 900 degrees Fahrenheit Neapolitan. Someone like Daniele at Pisana bakes a little bit lower temperature and a little bit longer to get the results he wants. But it does seem like wood-burning ovens in California go hand in hand more than anywhere else.
Yeah, I
Made
think
that
there
point
were
before.
a lot of cities were allowing them and didn't factor in pollution or any of the other issues that some of the other bigger cities were concerned about. So you will find a lot more wood fires in major city areas than you would in other places like New York, where you wouldn't be allowed to put one in.
But there's something about that romance, and that I don't know what it is. People have followed other people before them. You mentioned Alice and you mentioned Nancy, but you're all, and Wolfgang Puck, doing these wood burning ovens. And you're noticing that, has that changed now with the advent of the more electrics, that people can dial in exactly what they want if they're doing a Detroit style or Sicilian style pan? Or do you continue to, I just see like Gra and Ronin and Cosobona and on, all wood fired ovens.
I definitely see fewer wood-fired ovens in some of the larger places that I would consider artisan pizzas. I mean, for example, Sarah Minnick at Lovely 50/50s, even though we're not talking California, still artisan style pizza. She's replaced her wood-fired ovens with Pizza Master. And so she couldn't keep up with the demand and the consistency and decided to move on. And she was redoing her restaurant before COVID. And then that became a model for her, was to no longer have the wood fire pizza. So, and like, Justin for Apollonia's Pizza, because it's Detroit style, there are no wood fired ovens there because, it's not a norm. But yeah, I feel like the idea of that it has to be wood fire has changed.
Definitely.
And do you have like Neapolitans have boxes they check to be a Neapolitan, right? Like olive oil, temperature, flour, etc. When you talk about artisan pizza in California, are there things that you have to sort of like, is it the fermentation? Is it the hydration? Is it the all natural starter? Is it the toppings? Tell us about where artisan comes from. What does that mean?
So it is usually a slower and lower bake than your Neapolitan pizza. And so it's also usually has a more open crumb structure than a Neapolitan pizza. And I'm not talking about Canotto, I'm talking about your typical Neapolitan pizza. And it's not like, if you look at Neapolitan has a lot of very, very specific things that they request, even down to the type of olive oil. If you're looking at AVPN or tomato, like San Marzano's, you won't find that as much, but you will find the creative toppings where you're having maybe something on a post bake, a pre bake, and the way that those are layered in are more looking at chef techniques. So things that might take a little more skill for preparation than you would for a Neapolitan pizza, for example, like a duck confit. It's much more complex than just a sliced mortadella.
Okay.
Good question, Steve.
Does that answer, Steve, or do you need me to expand more? Okay.
No,
that was good. So I'm curious, Stephanie. So we have some more time left, but I want to start to go outside of Los Angeles and outside of California, and I want you to kind of take us down. Probably take us through your journey of exploring, the artisan, pizza trail, as it were, right? And tell us who you found and what you saw, what you liked, if there were any similarities, differences. We have lots of people. Honestly, I put together a list for you, and you came back with a list that was super expanded, and I don't even know some of the people on this list. So why don't we go through it? And
and I've expanded since what I sent you. So
good.
Because I was thinking about dates, because I think that's the really interesting thing while we were talking about these is, and I wish we had more. I know it sounds crazy, but I always wish we have more space in our books. And I'm sure, Steve, you can totally attest this too when you're making your books, is that, I love timelines. And so when I was pulling all of this information together to talk to you today, I would love to see when these pinpoints go together. And I think that's what was really interesting to me too when we were thinking about more players in the artisan pizza world. When people opened and how they relate to that time frame. So I'm going to kind of break down some of the places that I've mentioned to you, and their timing. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is around the 2005 2006 window, you have Portland, and so you have Nostrana, which is Kathy Wim's place, which is a little closer to a Neapolitan, but I would still consider in the artisan realm. Then you have Brian Spangler and Kim Nyland from Pizza Shoals open, and they were both previously bakers and had a bakery. And then you have Ken's Artisan, Ken Forkish, also in Portland. So within this like 1 year period, you have 3 pizza places that I would consider artisan, that were looking at local, and that were coming from more of a bread baking background than your typical pizzeria. So that's happening in Portland. And then in 2009, you have Tony Giminani opening Tony's Pizza Napolitana in an area in North Beach that wasn't very popular at that time. So he opens on the corner there. And then you also have from Jim Leahy opening at the same time. And, Jim's background is Sullivan Street Bakery. So again, a baker opening up a pizzeria. And Tony had been working in pizzerias pretty much all of his life. His brother had a pizzeria in the Castro Valley in 91. So Tony, while he didn't have his own place, he was opening up his place and around California Cuisine for a while. So that takes us through 2009. But the other interesting thing is Sarah Minnick. She opened Lovely Hula Hands, which was her restaurant that was inspired by Alice Waters in 2003, but then opened Lovely's 50/50 in 2010. So you've got 2010, not only Lovely's 50/50, but also Pizzeria Lola from Ann Kim opens up at that time. So I'd say those two were like big powerhouses to me still for artisan pizzas. Then in 2012, you've got Justin De Leon, who I mentioned with Apollonia's Pizzeria, which is Detroit, but just a really amazing pizza. And you also have Raza from Dan Richer opening in Jersey City in 2012. Then you have Pizzeria Badaya opening, so Joe Badaya in Philly. You also have, I forgot to mention in 2006, you also have Luke Hawley opening in New York. So you've got Mark opening up Luke Hawley at that time. And also Serious Pie here, Tom Douglas in Seattle. And so I think that was like a key time for pizza in a variety of places. So Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco. And then you've got this kind of new resurgence of places like Weeded, also opened in 2013, which is in Brooklyn. Amazing spot. You've got the newer ones coming through, like State of Mind Public House in Northern California. You've got Pizzeria, Leah Skirto. You've got Ops and Lindustry opening in Brooklyn. So that's kind of my pizza journey of places that have come through that I feel like are all amazing. But one that I feel like is like way at the forefront, which opened in 1980, which also isn't always talked about, is Metro Pizza. So, John Arena was there in 1980 with a beautiful pizza that I would say is also an amazing baker from a bread baking family. So they were very tuned into the dough. And now we have beautiful Truly Pizza opening up this year in Dana Point, California. So, and with Chris Decker also as an amazing artist in pizza.
And for those who don't know, what's the connection with Chris Decker to Metro?
And Truly now, is that he's a pizza chef for one of their locations. And what I think is also really fascinating is the California Milk Advisory Board started to have competitions in 1998, which I also think really elevated a lot of these pizza makers by asking them to make beautiful pizzas with I think it's up to like 450 different cheese mongers or manufacturers or types of cheese that you're able to use. And so I think that's also kind of within the last 5 years really helped push California into a new realm, because I don't really see other milk advisories or California or cheese groups or commissions really going after the pizza makers like the California Milk Advisory is.
Very interesting. I'm looking at the notes here under Artisan Pizza, and under Justin De Leon at Apollonia's, you wrote something very interesting. You wrote, "Not artisan, but the best Detroit." Can we talk about that?
Sure. Well, he does have two pizzas, so I guess he has his round and he has his square. So his round I think is closer to a New York style, but his square is Detroit. Now, he follows the properties of a Detroit style pizza for his squares. So I wouldn't call him artisan style because it's not the parameters of like what an artisan style pizza would be.
Okay. I'm just curious, like if
an artisan style, all of ours have been round. So it's always a round pie.
Okay. So like, for instance, I'm just curious, a little bit devil's advocate. If somebody's making a New York style pizza, but they're using a pre-ferment, is it still New York style pizza?
I'd have to see it.
You'd have to see it. Good answer.
And I'd have to taste it.
Okay.
More importantly.
Because generally speaking,
where are we going, Noel?
No. I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand how you delineate between all of the already known styles and artisan style, and there's got to be some gray area, and I'm wondering how you address that gray area, right?
There's always gray area with everything, but we really try to keep them. I mean, when you see all the photos side by side, it's pretty obvious for the most part. What fits and what doesn't fit. And obviously there's going to be some in the middle where you're like, well, this could go here, could go there, but we kind of look at all of the boxes that we want to check. And if it's, 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 6, then it's going to go to the one that it has 4 out of 6 on.
I totally get it. So I'm looking at the list of artisan pizzas, most of which you've already talked about. Are all of the people in that list, besides Justin, considered artisan pizza?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm so curious because there's a style, I don't know what the style is at Pie LA downtown in LA, but Stephanie, you've got to try that next time you're in LA.
I will add it to my list when I come out to see you, which I'm very excited about the LA Pizza Fest, because I had a blast at the Chicago Pizza Fest. So I can only imagine how much more amazing it's going to be.
I hope
it's going to be great.
So let's see. We haven't had a lot of questions, so I think that's actually a good sign. I think you're covering a lot, Stephanie. So that's a beautiful thing. Sometimes I have 100 questions and we end up going 45 minutes or an hour long. So we're not going to do that tonight. So
well, I have an interesting place in LA that I'm curious to know if you've been, which is Viking Pizza.
No.
So one of the styles that we talk about in the book is which it is in LA, and there's also one in Turlock that does the same thing, but it's Swedish kebab pizza.
Wow.
So
Putting it on my list.
we talk about it in the book about kebab pizza, and we found that it's very common in Nordic countries, so in Norway, Denmark, Sweden. But we found a couple places in California, weirdly enough, and one of them is in Glendale, and it's called Viking Pizza and Kebab. So if you've never had kebab pizza, you have to go try it. Their kebab pizza has mozzarella, sliced kebab, feta, onion, pepperoncinis, tomatoes, and then it's sprinkled with salad and cucumber and then drizzled with mayonnaise, like a kebab.
Sounds like too much.
Well, you can get it. There's also one that's just mostly kebab and tomato, but that's like the one that is very famous from a Swedish kebab pizza. It's all those things.
Steve, when you say sounds like too much, where are you coming from with that? Are you quantifying? I mean, is it by the pound? Is it just the number of items? Tell us.
It's the number of items. Yeah, I usually, besides the sauce
Less
and
than
cheese,
3?
Yeah, less than 3 is a good rule, I think.
That's kind
Unless
of my
you've got
rule.
unless it's a really sturdy crust, some kind of a heavy duty Detroit or Sicilian that can hold all those things. But typically, if it's a round cut into triangles, it's going to be hard to hold everything up, I think.
Yeah.
I went out to the suburbs in LA to try a shawarma pizza that was really underwhelming because the crust was an afterthought. Most places,
Yeah.
The marketing, you talk about marketing, like, look, we do a tacos al pastor pizza or what have you, but they don't think about the crust at all. They just worry about the toppings, and then the crust is kind of an afterthought. And frankly, we've been talking about all these great bread bakers. That's a big part of the experience, is having great crust at the base of every piece of pizza.
I completely agree. That's always my first thing when I have pizza is I'm always examining the dough and trying the dough separately and looking at the crumb structure and the cornicione and, smelling the dough to see if there's a fermentation side to it. All those things are important to me and how I like my pizza.
Awesome.
Can we address ranch really quickly? Just because every time I do a pizza tour, I'm asked about ranch. I say it has no place near a pizza. I don't know why you dip your crust into more dairy when you just had all the dairy in the form of cheese on it. But what are your guys' thoughts on it on the West Coast?
The West Coast loves ranch, but it's I think the West Coast likes dips in general, so it's kind of one of those things. Noel, what do you think?
Okay.
I mean, I would never put ranch on my pizza, but if the pizza wasn't very good and the crust was dry, I would probably, and I was drunk, I would probably do it. And I think
drunk was the quantifier there, right? Because if it was dry and it wasn't very good, I would just leave it.
Yeah.
Well, no, but I get it. But you know what? This is like, so like when I went to New York one of the last times, I was in like Queens, I think, and I was at a pizzeria and they were talking about something that they started doing, which was putting cold cheese on pizza. And it started out where some guy came in who was really drunk and he wanted the pizza fast, but he knew he was going to burn his mouth because he's drunk and he wanted to eat hot pizza. So he asked if they could put some cold cheese on the top of the hot pizza so he wouldn't burn his mouth, and it became a thing. Right. So are you as offended as I am over something like that? Because you seem to be offended by ranch.
Yeah.
But it serves its purpose, right? What if the crust is dry like a dog's bone?
I would rather have giardiniera, Steve. Truthfully, I would rather have giardiniera than anything else to put on my pizza. So that is my favorite thing ever.
Thank you.
So
thank you very much. I knew I was a big fan of yours, Stephanie. That's awesome.
And I have it in my
giardiniera.
fridge.
And by the way, giardiniera and sausage on the cover of the New York Times food section yesterday. We were so proud to see Chicago Thin Pizza, and giardiniera very proud, raising the flag for Chicago pizza across the country.
Good for you.
I love my giardiniera T-shirt that I got at the Chicago Pizza Fest. So I'm a definite fan,
we will have more,
and always have
we
been.
Will have more. We will have more August 26th and 27th here in Chicago. But I hope everybody comes to the LA event.
I've got a few questions for you guys from
Okay.
some of the attendees. Let's start with this one. This is from Peter. He wants to know, what about the pre-1945 California pizzerias that came from New York? Stephanie?
Hi, Peter Regas.
Aha. Do you know Peter?
Yeah.
Yes, of course I know
Yep.
Peter. All of us pizza history nerds know each other and love and appreciate each other. So, so we're talking about San Francisco, and I'm assuming that's what Peter wants to talk about. So the interesting thing is there are findings that obviously there were a lot of people coming to New York, but there were also a lot of people immigrating from Italy to San Francisco. And so there are some feeds that we found, like police blotters, and also San Francisco newspapers. There was an Italian newspaper that was very popular in San Francisco in the 40s and earlier for immigrants. Some were in Italian or in their own dialect, and so there is confirmed documentation that there were pizzerias very early on. In fact, let me see what. It'll take just a second for me to.
Yeah, all good.
I mean, one of the early ones I know in Sacramento was Shakey's, but that was like 54, I think.
Well, Shakey's was the first franchise, but there were there was a mention of a Neapolitan pizza place in San Diego in 1882.
Wow.
Wow.
There was, I mean, there was a mention of a place in 1902 in Fort Wayne, which is not California, but still very, very early on.
Sure.
I mean, Peter
Boston,
Regas was the guy
Boston in 1903.
Peter was the one who disproved the 1905 claim by Lombardi's in New York City. That was not the first pizzeria in America or in New York. In fact, there was a guy in the 1895, 1896 in New York. But boy,
Yeah.
18 in San Diego, that's early.
Really early.
Exactly. And then also just a pizza recipe was in English in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1947. So you're already seeing pizza as we know it in California. In 1932, there's an article about a neighborhood place that describes pizza and a pastry in Tuscany. But it talks about this pastry garnished with anchovies in 1932. So that potentially could have been pizza since it was garnished with anchovies.
Maybe a sfincione.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so there were an Examiner in 1943. There's Lupo's, which is part of a society column that gets a mention. So there are a variety, mostly in San Francisco that we found, not necessarily in Southern California, but quite a few. And it makes sense because there were quite a few communities of Italian immigrants at that time.
Yeah.
A few more questions that are coming in. Sirhan is asking regarding California pizza. What about the types of Indian pizzas you see in the Bay Area? Where does this fit? For example, Zante's.
Is it more of a pizza or is it a flatbread?
It's a good question. We'll have to get a follow-up answer.
Because there are, there's in Modernist bread, we talked about the vast array of different types of flatbreads that are out there, and a lot of them are derivative of Middle East, India, and so it could potentially be more of a flatbread. But that's also a gray line of toppings on top of bread. What is the difference?
There you go. Steve, I think you might be able to answer this one. Steve is asking, has anybody tried Piha Palace? I think I'm mispronouncing it. Steve, I believe you've been there, right?
Yeah, Piha Palace. It's I thought it was Silver Lake or Elko Park. It's good. I thought it was a little bit well done for my taste, and that's the criticism I'd heard. And maybe it was just an off night; they let it sit too long.
Can you
But
describe it
certainly,
for people who
yeah,
don't
it
know?
was. It's well, Indian American owned. It's a square pie, not unlike a Sicilian. It's definitely not a Detroit. Thick, focaccia-esque, I guess, but all Indian flavors. The sort of the butter chicken, if you will, on top of the pizza with some cheese. So tasty, certainly. But it was really well done underneath for me. But it's a square pie, thick, not a square cut pie, but like a Sicilian type of slice.
And it's gotten a lot of press, right? And people seem to really love it. Can you say why, having eaten it, that people are so enamored with it?
Well, just the flavor profile is so unique for Los Angeles. It's not wood fired. It does have the Indian flavors. Um, who doesn't love curry and cheese and
Hmm.
dough together, right? You run naan through a sauce when you're eating, and so it's sort of like the same thing. It's like those great flavors with, curry leaf and mustard seed on top of dough, a baked dough.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the history side too is that you've got the gold rush happening in 1849, and so there were a lot of people coming to California at that time to find gold, find their fortune. And so I think that that also probably had some time to bring more people to California than earlier. And so you would probably get bakers as well as pizza makers or immigrants coming in to set up shop doing something else than just mining.
Got it. Here's another one from Paul. I think Stephanie, you'd probably be the best one to answer this. How does the California pizza movement in the 70s fit within the context of mass market pizza becoming a part of mainstream food habits, or not?
Well, I mean, the 70s, it could be a few things. One, we have the slow food movement. So that obviously is taken a lot of territories by storm than we would have had previously in the 70s. Now people, go to farmers market. Most places have farmers markets now where you can buy local produce, where a decade ago might not be the case, or 20 years ago in all the places that you can go to now. So I think that's one. But you also have um, frozen pizza. You've got the franchise like Shakey's, which started in the 50s. That it was the first franchise before hamburgers and everything else, and chicken. So having Shakey's start that also brought pizza to a lot of places as franchises that it might not necessarily have had a local pizzeria. And then you have like Rose Titono, who made the um, Totino's pizza rolls. You have Chef Boyardee. You have all of these things that kind of changed the movement of pizza, not necessarily Californians, but made it easier for people to have pizza everywhere.
I like it. Let's see here. I'm looking at somebody asking. This is an anonymous question. Do you know Bettina in Montecito?
Bettina
Santa,
and
is
Montecito.
that Santa Barbara?
Yeah.
Bettina?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bettina's going to be at Pizza Fest.
Tell us about
Um,
Bettina.
I haven't been there. I'm going there in 3 weeks. Very excited. The husband and wife used to work at Roberta's in Bushwick.
Awesome.
Has a fantastic reputation for their pepperoni pizza, but they work out of a wood-fired oven, but they're going to be baking on an electric pizza master at Pizza Fest.
Awesome.
Can't wait to try it.
Joyce is chiming in. My husband worked in a pizzeria in Sacramento called Leaning Tower of Pizza in the late 50s. Ring a bell to anybody?
Well,
Has one in
Sacramento was
Minneapolis.
the home of tomatoes, so you had all of the tomato canneries there at that time. So it would be very, um, I'm sure there were a lot of pizzerias or people making pizza and pasta at that time in that area, and still. So, but no, I hadn't heard of that one.
Got it. going back to Shakey's, I've had a few conversations about Shakey's with Scott from Scott's Pizza Tours and also Brian
Mhm.
Spangler, and different people wondering how did what they might be calling like a tavern style pizza get to Sacramento? Any idea what the roots? Because it was sheeted pizza, and I remember it from, and it's not nothing
Yeah,
like it is now.
it was sheeted pizza. I mean, they were great. Talk about marketing. Like they were really great at marketing and creating the excitement of the event of coming to have pizza there, and everyone
Right,
wanted to have their pizza parties at
right.
Shakey's
Because
because
of the
you had the
live,
crazy hat, you had the outfits that were like the barbershop quartet outfits, red and white stripes with the arms banded, and you had the entertainment factor. I mean, it was like a precursor to Chuck E. Cheese,
Absolutely.
but you had alcohol, so you had pitchers of beer with your pizza there. And but Shakey's, was a big thing at the time, and also really big as a franchise outside of the U.S. When I was in Tokyo last month, there's Shakey's Pizza in Shibuya, right on the Shibuya crossing, like a block, less than a block away. So, Shakey's found itself outside of the US and really expanded well in a variety of places, but Asia is one of the bigger ones.
and I grew up on that in Minneapolis in the 70s. And it is interesting how that was a tavern style, I mean, a square cut pie
Hmm.
uh, from the West Coast. I had it recently in Palm Springs. It was not very memorable.
Yeah, so that's both myself and Nathan's first pizzas from California was Shakey's. Nathan in the closer to LA when I was in Northern California. So yeah, but Shakey's was a production. It was a fun thing to do, and they had about 500 locations by the 1970s.
They did.
So they did very well, and continued to open more. And even I think the first one was in Portland, I want to say. Oh no, Sacramento. The Yi Public House in Sacramento was the first one, and then they opened one in Portland, and then kind of filled in the blanks from there.
Love it. Love it. Let's see here. So there's a couple more questions that I want to get to, and I know we're running short on time. I'm just going to ask one kind of silly question. To what extent, Stephanie, does spectacle play a part in California or artisan style? From the spectacle that was created at Spago, the spectacle that was created at Shakey's, Chez Panisse, it seems like there's this theatrical element, right, that goes along with California or artisan style. Do you see it too? And is it anywhere on your matrix?
It wouldn't be on my matrix, but it was something that, like, for Spago, for example, they talk about having the open kitchen and watching pizzas being made and brought out to the customer. And it was, to be seen there at Spago at that point in time too. It was full of stars, whether they were celebrities or not. People were dressed up and ready to dine at that time. And so it was more of a celebration of food than as an art form than previously.
I love it. I love it. So we're getting close to that end time, and I want to, Stephanie, I want to give you the opportunity to make any closing remarks you might have, and then Steve, I want you to chime in at the end and let people know about some of the things that'll be happening and some of the offers we're giving them, as well as the fact that Stephanie and her crew have graciously agreed to donate a book set of Modernist Pizza, as well as some calendars, which we'll be raffling off or giving away tomorrow. So Stephanie, let me start with you. This has been awesome. Is there any kind of summary you want to give before we say goodbye?
Well, I think that exploring styles, if you've never had artisan pizza, I would say go out and try some and find out where you can get all of these different places, and enjoy pizza in general. LA, San Francisco, they both have a lot of wonderful places to offer pizza. And it's, like we talked about, Apollonia's Pizzeria for Detroit. It's not just artisan style. You can get great all different styles of pizza in California. And so, that is what in closing, artisan pizza is a movement and a great way to try different types of pizza, but it might not be what you like. But there are a lot of things to choose from, and especially with the amazing ingredients and cheese producers that you have here in California, that it's very fortunate. And of course, thank you, Steve and Noel, for allowing me to come on and talk about artisan pizza and talk about giardinara and all of the things that we love. And thanks to everyone who's been listening in, and continue to enjoy that love of pizza, slice after slice.
Beautiful. Well, Stephanie, I want to thank you and your crew because as somebody who has been involved my entire life in California pizza, from Shakey's to all the current artisans that are making great pizza here, I appreciate the objectivity that you bring. I appreciate the depth that you bring. I think to myself sometimes, how could somebody from somewhere else tell me anything about what I already know? And clearly, you've proven that statement to be kind of silly. So thank you for explaining artisan and California pizza in a way that makes perfect sense to me, and hopefully the people who've been watching. Steve, thank you for bringing this all together and for allowing us all to congregate and talk about pizza, if not eat it. And I'm going to pass the torch to you and let you hopefully tell us about the deal that people can get. I think we're going to be forwarding some information to people tomorrow, and also the whatever else you'd like to say. And as we say goodbye to people.
Sure. And I apologize. My camera and my earbuds lasted 1 hour, 23 minutes. So hopefully you can see and hear me. A reminder, everybody who registered, is it going to be entered? You've also got to follow Pizza City Fest LA on Instagram. You'll be registered for that drawing tomorrow for the set of Modernist pizza books. It's a $450 value. Also a chance to win some of their cool calendars. Please check us out at pizzacityfest.com. That's where the information is for the festival coming up on April 29th and 30th. It's at LA Live, right downtown, across from Crypto.com Arena, every day. Both those days, noon to 5. 38 pizza makers over 2 days. Need I say more? Plus the likes of Noel and his cohort. So that's all I've got. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this. And any last words, Noel, or should we say goodbye?
No, I just wanted to say thank you and let people know that I'm sorry that we don't have any more time. This has been something that I think is very important. And thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Steve, for letting us get the word out. And if you guys have any follow-up questions, you can email me or hit me up on social media, and I'll be happy to answer. I know we had a few questions that were a little bit outside of the realm of this particular webinar, but I'll be happy to address them in the future. So thank you, everybody. This has been awesome, and I look forward to seeing you all at Pizza City Fest, April 29th and 30th, Saturday and Sunday at LA Live. Let's do this.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Justin.